Norman Rockwell loved to paint the different seasons, but summer was always his favorite. Behind his cheerful paintings of smiling families and small-town life, however, he was hiding a secret that could have ruined everything he worked for. In 1964, he painted an image so powerful that it shocked the country. It showed the painful truth about America that many people didn't want to face. Gallery owners refused to show it, newspapers wouldn't print it, and many thought it would destroy his career. But Rockwell painted it anyway, showing the courage that defined who he really was. Norman Rockwell was born on February 3, 1894, in Harlem, New York City, at 789 St. Nicholas Avenue. His parents were Jarvis and Nancy Rockwell. His father worked at a textile company in Philadelphia his whole life. They didn't have much money, but they lived comfortably enough. Norman had an older brother named Jarvis, but they weren't very close. His father was Presbyterian, and his mother was Episcopalian, so religion at home was a mix of both. The Rockwell family had deep American roots that went back to England in 1635 when John Rockwell arrived on a ship called the Hopewell and helped settle Connecticut. From a young age, Norman was different. At only 3 years old, he would quietly listen as his father read stories by Charles Dickens aloud. He loved the way Dickens could describe people so vividly with words. His father liked to copy drawings from books, and Norman would watch him carefully. That's when something inside him came alive. His mother's father had been an artist too, though he never earned much from painting landscapes. Creativity was already part of Norman's blood. When Norman was 9, he already felt like an outsider. He was skinny, awkward, and often made fun of at school. He didn't connect much with his parents either, so drawing became his escape. It was something that made sense to him when the world didn't. He spent hours sketching alone and even began using humor and exaggerated faces to express himself. In 1903, his family moved from the city to a small town in Westchester County called Mamaroneck. Life there changed him. He discovered open skies, quiet streets, and friendly people. That small-town atmosphere would later inspire much of his art. He admired the work of Howard Pyle, one of America's most famous illustrators, and saved every penny he could to buy art supplies. His mother was strict about religion, but Norman kept drawing no matter what. He watched everything around him, the way people smiled, frowned, or stood, and filled his sketchbook with life. By 1908, at just 14 years old, Norman made a bold decision. He left high school to study at the Chase School of Fine and Applied Art in New York City. He commuted every day from Mamaroneck. Even though his family didn't have much money, they supported his dream. At Chase, he studied life drawing, which included working with live models, something shocking for a boy raised in a religious home. But Norman stayed focused and determined. 2 years later, he moved to the National Academy of Design, and then to the Art Students League of New York. There, his teachers, Thomas Fogarty, George Bridgman, and Frank Demond, helped him develop his storytelling skills and improve his understanding of the human body. That's when Norman realized he didn't want to be a fine artist. He wanted to be an illustrator, to tell stories through pictures that everyone could understand. At 18, in 1912, Norman got his first big break. His teacher, Fogarty, helped him get a job illustrating Tell Me Why stories for $150, a huge amount for him at the time. His work caught the eye of Edward Cave, who was creating Boy's Life, the official magazine of the Boy Scouts of America. Norman started drawing for them, producing hundreds of illustrations that showed the adventures, emotions, and dreams of young scouts. By 1913, when he was just 19, he became the art editor of Boy's Life. It was almost unheard of for someone so young to get that job. His artwork shaped how Americans saw the Boy Scouts, and by 1929, the Boy Scout calendar became the top-selling calendar in the country. Despite his success, Norman remained humble and cautious. He knew fame could disappear overnight, so he worked even harder. In 1914, he grew close to another artist, Clyde Forsyth. Together, they rented an old barn that once belonged to the famous Western painter Frederick Remington. Forsyth encouraged Norman to send his art to the Saturday Evening Post, the most popular magazine in America. Norman listened, and in 1916, at just 22 years old, he submitted his first cover. It was published in May, and changed his life forever. Within a year, Norman painted 6 covers for the Post. His art showed ordinary people in touching, funny, or inspiring moments. Americans fell in love with his work. But fame brought pressure too. By 25, Norman was overwhelmed and anxious. He left boy's life to focus on the Saturday Evening Post, where he went on to create more than 300 covers over his career. In 1916, he married Irene O'Connor, a schoolteacher 3 years older than him. They married quickly and barely knew each other. Their relationship was troubled from the start. Irene wanted a calm home life, while Norman was consumed by his art. They never had children, and Norman later admitted she didn't truly love him. After 14 years of unhappiness, Irene filed for divorce in 1930. Even while his personal life collapsed, his professional life soared. By the 1920s, he was one of America's most recognized illustrators. Yet behind his success, Norman battled self-doubt and depression. He often felt like a fraud and once said that all he had was the ability to draw, which didn't seem to count for much. But instead of quitting, he turned his insecurities into empathy. His paintings captured shy, awkward, or lonely people, the same kinds of people he had always felt connected to. After his divorce, he met and married Mary Barstow, a young schoolteacher and aspiring writer. They had 3 sons, Jarvis, Thomas, and Peter, but Norman's struggles with anxiety continued. He was hospitalized in 1933 for what doctors called nervous exhaustion. To help him recover, he and Mary traveled to Europe, but instead of feeling inspired by the great art there, Norman grew more depressed. He began to think his own work was meaningless compared to the masters. When he returned home, he threw himself back into painting. In 1935, he was hired to illustrate Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. He visited Mark Twain's hometown in Missouri to make sure every detail was right. Years later, he admitted that some of those early works had racial stereotypes he regretted deeply. By 1938, Norman and Mary bought a farmhouse in Vermont. From the outside, it looked like the perfect family life he often painted, but behind closed doors, Mary struggled with drinking, and Norman was anxious and restless. He began therapy with Erik Erikson, a psychoanalyst who helped him understand that his idealized paintings of happy families were actually his way of healing from a lonely childhood. In 1942, inspired by President Roosevelt's famous speech, Norman painted the 4 freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. Though the Saturday Evening Post was unsure about the project, he believed in it so strongly that he funded it himself. The paintings toured the U.S. in 1943, raising $132 million for the war effort, over $2 billion today. Over 1 million people came to see them. Yet not everyone was happy. Some Americans criticized his freedom of worship painting for showing people of different races praying together. Rockwell received hate mail and threats, but he never backed down. That same year, tragedy struck. In late 1943, his studio caught fire and burned to the ground, destroying hundreds of paintings, costumes, and personal belongings worth over $1.5 million in today's money. Despite all the loss, Norman kept painting. His life was full of struggle, but through it all, he never stopped believing in the simple goodness of people. His art showed what America could be: honest, kind, and human, even when the world around him was not. Norman Rockwell's life took another hard turn in 1943 when tragedy struck. His entire studio burned down, destroying hundreds of paintings, props, costumes, and personal belongings worth about $100,000 back then, more than $1.5 million today. Some neighbors said it was just an accident caused by ashes from his pipe. But others, including Norman himself, suspected it might have been arson. He had been arguing with a neighbor over property lines, but no one ever proved anything. What mattered most was that everything he loved and worked for was gone in one night. The people of his town felt his pain and brought him new pipes as a kind gesture of support. That same year, Norman painted Rosie the Riveter for the Saturday Evening Post. The image showed a strong woman confidently crushing Hitler's book under her foot. Rosie was based on a 19-year-old telephone operator named Mary Louise Doyle, though Norman made her look much larger and stronger than she was in real life. He later felt guilty about changing her image, but the painting became iconic. Still, not everyone loved it. Many men were angry to see a woman shown as powerful and capable. Thousands canceled their magazine subscriptions, calling it unfeminine. Norman didn't care. He had just helped redefine what a hero could look like. While his art continued to shine, his home life was falling apart. His wife, Mary, was drinking heavily and battling depression. She had to be treated at the Austin Riggs Center, a psychiatric hospital nearly 90 minutes away from their Vermont home. Sometimes she stayed there for months at a time and even went through electroshock therapy in 1952. Norman felt terribly lonely. He often found comfort in his art and the women he painted, forming quiet emotional connections through his work that helped him keep going. In 1953, the Rockwells moved to Stockbridge, Massachusetts, so Mary could be closer to the hospital. Norman also started therapy, trying to deal with his own anxiety, the constant pressure of fame, and the sadness at home. Earlier, in 1946, he had released his autobiography My Adventures as an Illustrator. In it, he admitted that he often felt insecure and afraid of failure, even though people saw him as America's happiest painter. He described his stress, perfectionism, and constant fear of not being good enough. But he left out one dark truth: many believe he was secretly using amphetamines to stay awake and meet his crushing deadlines. His public image was all smiles and laughter, but behind the scenes, he struggled with exhaustion, anxiety, and depression. Most people thought he moved to Stockbridge for the peace and quiet, but it was really so Mary could be near the care she needed. Norman took on extra work, magazine covers, advertisements, and serial art, just to pay her medical bills. The man who painted perfect families was living in a home filled with sadness and fear. Then, more trouble came from within his own family. In 1953, Norman's son Peter publicly accused him of being distant and obsessed with work. The news embarrassed Norman deeply. But years later, letters found by his grandson revealed the truth. Norman had tried to be there for his sons. He gave them money for art supplies, supported their projects, and even built a small studio for his oldest son, Jarvis. Still, his perfectionism often got in the way. He could spend a full year working on one cover, repainting it again and again until he was satisfied, even borrowing money from the bank to keep going. His obsession with getting everything right cost him time with his family. Then, in 1959, tragedy struck again. Mary died suddenly of a heart attack. Norman was devastated. He poured his grief into his paintings, but publishers didn't want his sad, emotional work. They only wanted the cheerful America they thought he represented. His therapist, Eric Erickson, once told him, "You paint your happiness, but you don't live it." Those words hit him hard. He kept his sorrow bottled up and went back to work, though it was taking more out of him than ever before. 2 years later, in 1961, Norman remarried. His third wife, Molly Punderson, was a retired schoolteacher. He was 67, and she was 65. Norman openly admitted that he married her because she was organized and practical, and he needed help keeping his affairs in order. After years of emotional chaos, he craved stability. Their marriage wasn't built on romance, but it gave him peace and balance when he needed it most. Then came 1963, a major turning point. After 47 years, Norman left the Saturday Evening Post. His final cover was of President John F. Kennedy, created right after the assassination. In total, he had painted 321 covers for the magazine. But by then, he felt the world had changed, and so had he. The magazine restricted him from painting Black Americans in anything but servant or background roles. Norman said, "I portrayed the best of all possible worlds. That kind of stuff is dead now." He wanted to tell the truth. In 1964, he joined Look magazine, which gave him the freedom to paint about real issues, racism, poverty, and injustice. The backlash was immediate. People sent him hateful letters and death threats, calling him a race traitor for supporting civil rights. But even at 70 years old, he refused to stop. That same year, he painted the problem we all live with, showing 6-year-old Ruby Bridges walking to school, escorted by U.S. Marshals. On the wall behind her were racist slurs and a splattered tomato. The image was powerful and shocking. Many readers were furious. Thousands canceled their subscriptions, but Norman had finally painted what was in his heart. Through the rest of the 1960s, he continued to address race inequality. He knew he had once painted black people in stereotypical or servant roles, and he deeply regretted it. He started talking with civil rights leaders and activists to learn how to portray them with honesty and respect. He didn't want to be seen as a white savior, he wanted to show real people, their strength, and their courage. Later that same year, 1964, 3 civil rights workers, James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner, were murdered in Mississippi while helping register black voters. The Ku Klux Klan and local police were behind it. Norman was heartbroken and haunted by the news. He poured his pain into a painting called Murder in Mississippi, showing the men's final moments surrounded by torchlight and shadows of their killers. He worked on it non-stop for 5 weeks. It was one of his darkest, most emotional works. In 1967, he painted New Kids in the Neighborhood, showing black and white children meeting each other in a newly integrated suburb. It was calm but powerful, full of silent tension and hope. Norman was 73 then, tired but still determined to use his art to make people think. In 1978, something strange happened. 7 of his paintings were stolen from a gallery in Minnesota, in what became the state's biggest art theft ever. One of them, Taking a Break, 1919, was found nearly 40 years later in a New Jersey home. It had been bought cheaply after being damaged in a game of pool. Years after his death, Rockwell's life continued to raise questions. In 2013, biographer Deborah Solomon claimed he had hidden erotic drawings and might have struggled with repressed sexual feelings, possibly toward men. Some experts believe the hints in his diaries were true, while his family strongly denied them. The real truth remains uncertain. In 1977, President Gerald Ford awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest honor a civilian can receive. But Norman was too sick to attend, so his son Jarvis accepted it for him. At 83, he was frail and often told friends he felt like he had sold out. He had made plenty of money but wondered if he had sacrificed deeper meaning for commercial success. Norman Rockwell died on November 8, 1978, at age 84. After his death, people discovered $50,000 in unpaid therapy bills, about $200,000 today. He had spent his life fighting depression, anxiety, and self-doubt while painting joy and warmth for everyone else. His bills told the story his paintings couldn't. Then, in 2004, an amazing discovery was made. Behind a fake wall in another artist's house, someone found Rockwell's original Breaking Home Ties, one of his most famous works. The man had hidden it during a messy divorce and replaced it with a perfect copy. When the real one was finally auctioned in 2006, it sold for $15.4 million. It made people wonder how many more of Rockwell's lost masterpieces might still be hidden somewhere, waiting to be found.